On July 24, 2024, Ford executives awkwardly begin their earnings call. The audience is made up of angry investors and skeptical analysts. Ford missed Wall Street's earnings forecast, and as a result, the company's shares suffered their steepest decline since the 2008 financial crash. Even more worrying is its $103 billion debt. The cause of this crisis seems obvious to everyone except Ford. Management is preparing for a barrage of difficult questions and harsh comments. They have said that Ford is a different company than it was 3 years ago, says a Morgan Stanley analyst, but the stock market doesn't seem to agree at all. Management is perplexed. After a storm of criticism, Ford's CEO Jim Farley speaks out. The journey into electric mobility has been humiliating. Ford had high hopes for electric vehicles, investing $100 billion in the electric vehicle race. But now that bet has failed, and it appears they are pulling out. What happened to Ford? How did they end up here? It turns out there is more to this than just electric vehicles. The Ford situation is bad, but on the surface, most people would assume that things are going well, because in fact, their revenues are steadily increasing. At the end of 2020, their revenues fell dramatically during the pandemic by over 50% compared to the previous year, but after this difficult period, things started to pick up again. Annual revenue was $127 billion in 2020, then $137 billion in 2021, then $158 billion in 2022, and finally $176 billion in 2023. That is really impressive growth, especially in a market as saturated as the auto industry. But a company is much more than just revenue, and at this scale, things are much more complicated. In fact, we can see a lot of the problem just by looking at profitability. Ford's operating profit has gone up and down, but after a hugely unprofitable season during the pandemic, things were actually looking better in 2023, but as time went on and investors watched, their optimistic outlook faded, view in caution, and ultimately in concern because Ford's profits fell while sales rose. As a result, Ford fell to 494th place in the S&P 500 and almost disappeared from the list altogether. What is going on here? If revenues are rising, how can profits fall at the same time? Before we can give an answer to this, we need to look at one crucial detail. The most important reason why the alarm bells are ringing is Ford's debt. With total debt of almost $150 billion in 2023, Ford had a debt-to-equity ratio of 2.2, which means that debt is more than twice the shareholders' equity, and this number has since even risen to a debt-to-equity ratio of 3.59. For comparison, the industry average for automakers is 1.01. BMW's ratio at that time was 1.17, and Toyota was around 0.6. Ford has an astonishing amount of debt, but what's even stranger is that this is nothing new. Even before the pandemic in 2009, they had a debt-to-equity ratio of 3. They drastically reduced this value in 2021, but their debt has slowly risen again and grew by over $10 billion in 2023 alone. Ironically, the Ford F-Series has been the best-selling car in the United States for 40 years in a row, but, financially speaking, the situation is still shaky at best. There are two reasons for this, and one of them is Ford's ambitions in the field of electric vehicles. The saddest thing about it is that it all started so well. In the 2010s, Ford cautiously observed the electric vehicle industry. They toyed with the idea, but more as a concept without making any serious investments. In 2017, they then formed a special group to research electric vehicles, the Team Edison. The goal was to produce a fully electric SUV by 2020, and soon, in November 2019, Ford unveiled its first electric vehicle. The unveiling of the Mustang Mach-E felt like an Apple press conference. It generated a lot of interest, but Ford had much bigger plans. In reality, the Mustang Mach-E was a test, and the real breakthrough in electric vehicles should only come in a few years. Other car manufacturers come along like Tesla, GM with the Hammer EV or Rivian, all of which clearly look like electric vehicles. This strategy works because most EV customers want something striking and completely different, but Ford had other plans. Remember what I said about the Ford F-Series? It's the best-selling car in America and has been for 43 years. It's also been the best-selling truck for 48 years. They had already found the perfect design, so they used their golden era as a template. In May 2021, they unveiled a working prototype, the Ford F150 Lightning. It had a few modern improvements, but ultimately it was designed to appeal to millions of people who just want a simple, effective pickup truck. The same reliable product, but electric. Ford built this truck with its customers in mind every step of the way, and it paid off. Now let's take a step back. In 2023, over 40,000 units of the Mach-E were sold, which is an increase of 3% over the previous year, and over 15,000 units of the F-Lightning, which is an increase of 18%. That sounds good, but when you look at the totality of the figures, that's not the case. In their official sales report, we see that Ford's total vehicle sales were almost 2 million units, and the total number of electric vehicles was 64,000. So in reality, electric vehicles only made up 3.2% of sales, but that's still a good start, isn't it? It's a niche market, but it's growing. That's true, but unfortunately electric vehicles are a complete waste of money. They invested $11.4 billion in 2 battery factories, then another $1.8 billion in Canada to manufacture electric vehicles, then 2 billion euros in an electric vehicle factory in Germany, but that's only a small part of the whole. Ford invested in 2022 $50 billion allocated for electric vehicle spending alone. Electric vehicles are not at all comparable to gasoline vehicles as they are completely unique. They require completely unique facilities for batteries and factories for manufacturing. Bear in mind, these tens of billions of dollars are being invested in something that is a tiny fraction of Ford's actual revenue, but that's okay because it's a fast-growing market, right? Ford is just building its long-term future. That's what they thought for sure, but the electric vehicle market has changed dramatically. In 2022, a race to the bottom slowly began as Tesla battled emerging electric vehicles in China. They cut the price of the Model 3 by 6% and then the Model Y by 11%. This was because their Chinese competitor BYD was already offering much cheaper electric vehicles. However, since Tesla is the market leader, this triggered a domino effect. This war escalated further and further and became more and more difficult. They had to reduce the prices of the F150 Lightning by up to $7,000. It wasn't just about the prices. Material costs were also rising and supply chains were becoming increasingly vulnerable, and this had been the case for some time. In the first quarter of 2024, the Ford's EV department reported losses of $1.3 billion. This means that they were making a loss of $130,000 for every electric vehicle produced. As costs rose, buyers and governments got cold feet. Governments withdrew their support for the industry. Germany ended its electric vehicle program in December 2023, and New Zealand, France, and Sweden soon followed suit. Now Trump is trying to do the same in the USA. It's an overcrowded market that is also extremely unprofitable. They have officially canceled a planned electric SUV, and wrote off most of their investments in electric vehicles as a loss. The year 2024 meant a loss of $5 billion for Ford's electric vehicles, and the exact same is expected for 2025. In the earnings release from the beginning of the video, Ford announced that they would reduce spending on electric vehicles from 40 to 30% and cut production of the F-150 Lightning. All of this is quite surprising. Everyone said electric vehicles were the future and every company was in the race for them, but now the future is uncertain. What is surprising, however, is that this is just one of the crises that Ford is dealing with. There is a whole other crisis that is affecting the company, and somehow it is much worse than the EV disaster. Although Ford holds the #1 spot among the best-selling cars in America, the company has some serious problems. They don't seem to be able to get their quality control under control, and, honestly, many of the cars they deliver end up being returned. In 2020, Ford recalled over 700,000 vehicles because the backup cameras suddenly stopped working. However, that's really nothing compared to what happened just 4 years later. There were 37 different recalls affecting 2 million Explorers and almost 800,000 vehicles of other models, all due to electrical problems. And to make matters worse, in the same year, Ford was also ordered to pay a fine of $165 million to the US government for recalling vehicles too slowly and making false statements. Back in 2014, Ford spent $4.8 billion on warranty repairs, which, honestly, is quite high. But over the years, this problem just got worse. By 2023, this figure had risen to $11.5 billion. Repair costs also went up by about $2 billion. During the second quarter 2024 earnings call, an analyst asked how investors can really have confidence in earnings growth when surprise warranty issues seem to arise every single year. Ford's CEO Jim Farley, nervously replied that quality is Ford's top priority, but honestly, investors just don't believe him. In fact, Ford's PE ratio is currently at an incredibly low 6.32. In this quarter alone, Ford spent $2.3 billion on recalls and warranties. The costs were sometimes as high as $25.5 million a day. The famous Ford F-Series does not seem to be the main culprit, but, you know, many of the fashionable models from Ford. In fact, the defect rate of Ford increases by 70% after a new model is launched. The industry average is only 20%. Something has gone terribly wrong here. It seems to be thriving and dying at the same time. The company can't get its costs under control. Increasing revenues don't mean much if they don't translate into profits. Now this has cost the company billions and the trust of investors. But it's also in too deep to pass up on electric vehicles. Tens of billions have been poured into electric vehicle factories and plants that churn out unprofitable cars. Electric vehicles may have been a tempting investment in the future, but they have distracted Ford from a growing precipice right beneath them. Ford needs to focus on its core business, and they need to get their quality control in order before it destroys their brand. Apart from the new electric vehicle makers, Ford is the only American automaker that has never gone bankrupt. But the way things are going, who knows what will happen next? Well folks, and with that we end our video today. Thank you all for watching to the end. I hope you enjoyed our content. If you liked this video, we would be happy if you could like it and share the video on your social networks and subscribe to the channel. We have always appreciated your support. Now let's get ready for the next video here on our Wikipedia Plus channel. We'll be back soon. A big hug, and until then, bye.